Hi, I'm Don Dickson. I want to thank you for joining me for another session of our master class. We've been discussing presentation of lures over the last few weeks, and we're currently zeroing in on casting. Just a short vlog today. I want to share with you the importance of speed control on the cast. It's not really understood, so that's the reason I'm going to give it a little extra time today. I'm just going to talk about one thing. I'm going to talk about speed control on the cast. Once we arrive at the school of fish, we found a school of fish in deep water. Now it's time to go to the cast, because we want to keep our lure right on the money in the kill spot, all the time, 100% of the time. We don't want to be making big, long trolling passes and figure-8 runs and all of that kind of stuff. We're out of position too often, too long. So we need to anchor down and throw right to the school of fish. Now they're in an area, even though the school of fish could be 100 fish, 200, 300 fish, but they're in a relatively small area. So we want to be casting to that spot. It's the most efficient way to load the boat. So with that being said, we said in casting deep structure, which 99% of the time that's where the fish are. They're in deep water. They're not up there in the bank. They're not along that shoreline. You're not going to find a school of 400 walleye up there in 3 feet of water. You're not going to find a school of 5 or 6 pound largemouth bass up there in 3 feet of water. 400 big bass, they're going to be down there in deep water. That school of fish exists, and it's in deep water. Most fishermen never come into contact with them because they're not ever looking for them in deep water, and they don't fish deep water. So they never come across those fish. But we do. And when we locate those fish, it's time to go to the cast. Now, that being said, we established we can do it 2 ways. We can do it with a crankbait. We can do it with a jump bait. There's only 2 types of lures that can effectively fish deep water. And we would prefer to use the crankbait every time. But in our last talk, we described that we can't fish a crankbait to those deep fish if we can't anchor the boat in 10 feet of water or less. And we always want to be fishing uphill on the cast, always. Most fishermen fish downhill. They sit in deep, throw in shallow. And about the time they get their lure 5 or 6 or 8 feet out from the shore, it's out of position with no chance to catch a fish, back to where they're sitting out there in deep water. But by anchoring shallow, throwing deep, our lure's in position all the way to catch fish. Now, let me throw a hypothetical at you. You're going to go out to your favorite lake. You have a structure that you've caught fish on for years. It's productive. And you also have good shoreline sightings, and you can go right out there and anchor your boat down in about 7 feet of water, throw out and fan cast the end of that bar. So Saturday morning, you're out there doing that. On the second or third cast you make, you're sinking your 100 down there, your crankbait, and you start reeling it in, and you hit a fish. It's an adult fish, 3 pounds, or it could be 4.5, whatever it is, but it's an adult fish, 3 pounds or bigger if you're fishing bass. Now, you hit that fish, you get him in the boat, and you had a normal kind of retrieve speed. So you make a second cast, you sink your lure. You twitch it once it's on the bottom, and you start reeling in about the same speed, boom, you hit a second fish. The school of fish is there. Now, at this point, critically important, trust me when I tell you, bass fishermen, listen to me, critically important, you make that third cast off the end of that bar, you sink your lure. In this time, you pick that speed up, you increase that speed. And if you hit another fish, you put that fish in the boat, and you make cast number 4. On your next cast, you increase the speed even more. With each and every cast, you should increase your speed. I've seen it on film. I actually saw an old 16 millimeter film that was shot. It was underwater shot, where there's a school of bass, and they brought a jump bait, a plastic worm, through that school of fish, and the fish ignored it. They brought it by 3 or 4 times, totally ignored it. And then they came through with a fast-moving spoon plug. And 4 or 5 fish tried to get at the lure, and one did take it, and they ripped him out of the school of fish. They threw back in there again and they reeled even faster. You saw that spoon plug coming. Every fish in that school was trying to attack that spoon plug. And they kept it up and kept it up and kept it up. I'm watching it on film. When Buck showed me that, I couldn't believe it. This isn't something controlled that was done in somebody's living room in one of those little tanks, you know, to try to sell lures. This was actually shot in a lake environment, a lake underneath the water, watching a school of fish and how they reacted to that bottom bumping lure busting through there. So, Buck always said, we're increasing our speed with every cast. That's the reason he likes to have 2 people in a boat. You got 2 people in a boat, you can keep those fish in a frenzy. And with every fish you catch, the next cast you make, you want to increase your speed till you get to a point where you can't crank it any faster. Now, a couple of reasons for this. It's the speed of that lure. It's the increase in the speed of that lure that triggers that frenzy in a school of fish. I've seen it on film. They're in a frenzy, and you can keep them that way as long as you don't spook them. Now, how could you spook them? Buck used to say it like this. Speed control is extremely important to catching a fish, first of all. It's also important on how many fish you catch out of that school, because if you hook a fish, got the right speed control, you hook a fish, and then you play that fish, and if you're using a spinning rod and light tackle and stuff, you play that fish for 15 minutes, you've spooked a school of fish. What happens when fish are hooked in a school, other fish will tend to follow the hooked fish. And if you get a school of fish coming up and they get in range and see your boat, normally that's it. The movement's over. They go back home. So the idea is when you hook a fish, get them out of there, get them in the boat quick, get on to the next cast. And let's face it, when you're casting deep structure and you're in a school of fish, normally they're adult fish. You occasionally get into a school of 2.5 pounders or something, but most of the time you're in a school of big fish. So you can't just horse them in 2 seconds, but you can force the issue. Get them in the boat as quickly as you can and efficiently, but quickly as you can, and get on to the next cast. So when we're talking about speed control, it's speed in the retrieve, which should increase with every cast to the school of fish. And secondarily, how fast do you get that fish out of the school and into the boat? And by the way, if you lose a fish, especially if you lose a big fish, normally that'll be it. That'll be the end. Or if you lose 2 or 3, that'll definitely be the end. The school will be gone and you'll lose the school. So the idea is get them in the boat quickly, don't lose any, and catch the big numbers. Like Buck says, your super catches will always be when you're in that position, casting a crankbait from a good casting position and doing a really good job if there's 2 of you. Like when I had the Ryder fishing at Arlington Reservoir, 36 fish in 30 minutes. Or like the smallmouth, Tommy and I, whatever it was, 34, 35 fish, 38 fish in the rainstorm, lightning going off everywhere. Those are the situations where you catch those numbers. So you got a school of fish, you identify them, you found them, they're on structure, they're active, they're moving, and you can find that casting position where you can throw the crankbait. Speed becomes your ally. You got to increase every cast, and you got to make sure you get that fish out of the school as quickly as possible and try not to lose any. And then you start making those catches like most guys just dream about. 20 big fish, 25 big fish, 28 big fish, 30 big fish. I had an old spoon plugging friend just sent me a text the other day. He was up on Eagle Lake. He set a record, his own personal record, of 30 smallmouth bass on 32 casts. Smallest fish 4.5, biggest fish 6.2. Steve Craig. Heck of a catch of fish right there, boy. So I thought I'd give him a shout out and mention it. But this isn't something that just happens to me or just happens to Buck Perry. There are guys doing it. But you got to do it right. You have to do it right. So I'm going to end up just by saying most fishermen today, and this is the reason I wanted to talk about it now, most fishermen today, they'll spend a whole day. You know the casters that are casting the bank? They'll spend the whole day with the same retrieve speed. At the end of the day, if they don't catch anything, if they catch one or two, they say, boy, the fish weren't doing today, man, it wasn't very good at all. We didn't catch anything, you know. Well, we don't know if it was any good at all or not because they only check one speed control. Just as in trolling, in casting, you have to change your speeds. And it's the fast speed on the cast when a school of fish have moved. It's the increase of speed which triggers those fish to remain in a frenzy. I've seen it on film. Every fish trying to get that lure. Every fish. And when you got them going like that, man, I'm telling you, there's nothing like it. If you've never been into a school of fish like that, let this be the season that you do. Get into a school. Get serious. Put in your study. And get you some casting positions on good structure. And be there when those fish move, and I'm telling you, you'll never forget it. But speed control. Just because we're casting doesn't mean we get to forget speed control. And I guess I'll close with this. I've seen so many bass guys that I get them trolling a little bit at a school, and they catch a fish on a troll a spoon plug. They immediately get in the anchoring position and pick up their worm rod and start throwing the soft plastic. They totally have forgotten depth and speed control catches fish. You've already established when you catch a fish on a troll what the speed is. Why would you change it and go to almost a dead stop? It just makes no sense whatsoever. So, remember speed control when you're casting deep structure. And like the example I used the last time we talked, sometimes it has to be speed control as best you can with a jump bait. But it's always depth and speed that catches fish. So I want to finish by saying I really appreciate all the cards and letters coming in, you know, all of the emails I'm getting and all of the kind words. You guys are terrific. I really appreciate you. I know we have a solid base of strong fishermen out there that if you're working with me and we start sharing with those young people, getting them invested, getting them into some study, and then taking them fishing, catching them some fish, we can have a lot to say about the future of our favorite sport. So until the next time, follow us on Instagram if you would, like us on Facebook, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're having fun now, and we got a lot coming up in the future, so stay with us, and I'll see you the next time.